Welcome to Lesson 1 of the School for Ethical Education's Achieving with Integrity seminar. My name is David Wangard, and I'm the Director and President of the School for Ethical Education, or C for short. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the scholarship of Dr. Jason Stevens, currently an Associate Professor at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. Jason began a collaboration with C in 2006 while he was still working at the University of Connecticut. His research focus has included the study of adolescent moral development with a specific interest in student commitment to academic integrity. Jason introduced C to the research supporting ethical functioning and was the lead creator of our initial Achieving with Integrity seminar. Now for Lesson 1. We will reintroduce our tri-factor model for ethical functioning with a focus on developing ethical awareness. Someone with ethical awareness can identify when an ethical situation exists. In our recent interviews of college students, we sought to learn about their ethical awareness. We asked students, can you describe an ethical situation you've experienced recently? Over half the students struggled to identify a clear ethical situation, while some of the students could cite a very clear example of an ethical situation.
Very simple ones. When you see stuff laying around campus that is desirable, that you could just take quite easily, that's an ethical dilemma every day.
I put myself in situations where I don't have to deal with bad vibes, so I never really run into that situation.
Okay, fair enough.
Not necessarily, no. I'm not 100% sure I could give you a situation I could think of.
I go to school, so there's always the cheating thing.
Oh, you see cheating?
Yeah, not cheating, but yeah.
A lot of academic dishonesty comes up within students. Maybe not me personally, but there's a lot of copying, this and that, cheating. But it's up to you if you want to make that choice.
An ethical issue. So, I'm personally more familiar with healthcare, and so I think an ethical issue would be around sort of end of life type of aspect. At what point is it ethical to keep a person alive as opposed to improving quality of life?
Lesson 1 will include a vocabulary and the strategies to increase students' ethical awareness, and our goal is to move students beyond a gut response that we often heard in our interviews and expand their awareness of what defines an ethical situation. Let's review C's tri-factor model that supports our lessons to strengthen student ethical functioning. Recall that we described an adapted use of Rest's model of ethical functioning in our previous introduction. Our tri-factor model includes ethical awareness and the vocabulary and strategies taught in this lesson, which are designed to help students answer the question, is this an ethical situation? Factor 2 is called ethical judgment, and we will teach strategies in Lesson 2 that help students respond to the question, what should I do as an ethical person? The third factor is ethical action, and we will teach strategies in Lesson 3 to help students respond to the question, how do I do the right thing? As an overall goal of ethical functioning, we introduce here the metaphor of helping students find and remain on the ethical high road of life. We apply the metaphor of an ethical high and low road where the mastery of each ethical factor can help a student remain on an ethical path. In our academic integrity research, we recognize that when individuals demonstrated competence with all three factors, they were more likely to self-report acting with integrity, and this results metaphorically of staying on the ethical high road. As we consider the factors individually, a person who demonstrates ethical awareness can recognize the ethical implications of a situation, or in the cases they might study in history or literature. If ethical situations are not recognized, it is easy to veer off the ethical high road. We highlight here that helping students practice analysis of academic narratives with a case in history, literature, or science is one of the main applications for the skills taught in this seminar. The skills taught here provide students an excellent analysis strategy for deeper content understanding, and it is our hope that the academic practice with these skills will also lead to their demonstrating ethical action in life. With Factor 2, ethical judgment, we find that individuals can reason and make ethical judgments that apply to ethical situations. Those who can't reason ethically are more likely to fall off the ethical road. It is on this factor that the moral psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg focused much of his life's work. James Rest and his colleagues recognized that ethical action was missing from Kohlberg's model, and they observed that individuals might be able to recognize an ethical situation and make an ethical judgment, but needed to strengthen their ethical commitment, willpower, and the relevant social and technical skills in order to act on a judgment. As an example, just saying no thanks is a simple refusal skill that provides a response for those trying to resist an unethical offer. We acknowledge that this is one of the most basic social skills. However, students need to recognize skills like this in order to support their ethical action. Our third lesson will address some of the skills that we can integrate into an existing course to strengthen student commitment, willpower, and ability to act ethically. This seminar will not address all of the various applications that could be made to support ethical action, but Lesson 3 will introduce you to the broad concept with specific examples you can integrate into your lessons as you teach throughout a school year. Now let us turn our focus onto the process of strengthening ethical awareness. As we have noted, ethical awareness, or our ability to recognize that an ethical situation is present, is essential for anyone to enter into the next steps of ethical functioning. We define an ethical situation as any circumstance where ethical values are compromised. We will elaborate on core ethical values with a specific list of values in upcoming slides. Lesson 2 and 3 will highlight the additional factors of ethical judgment and ethical action. Building on our introduction, let's take a closer look at the word ethics. So how do you define the term ethics? You may recall our definition from the introduction, but our point here is to engage your thinking about the meaning of ethics, and we encourage you to pause here as we believe it is helpful for you to write down your own thoughts. Let's compare your definition of ethics with the responses we have heard during other workshops and interviews.
I don't know. Honestly, I can't even think of anything.
I think ethics is like doing the right thing. Basically just kind of like right and wrong. What is right and what is wrong?
What's right and what's wrong?
Like right and wrong.
Guidelines between what's wrong and what's right.
We won't discuss all of these participant definitions, but a response we hear frequently is ethics is defined by following my conscience. It prompts us to ask the question, what informs one's conscience, and what ethical values guide one's conscience? Without more information, this response is not prescriptive to determine what an ethical situation is. Others have stated that ethics are defined by obeying rules and laws. An ethical situation would thus be defined by something where a rule or a law is broken. This provides a clear but narrow definition of ethical situations. This agrees with the classic deontological ethics model, which will be referenced in the next slide. But this approach is challenged when two rules can come into conflict, such as always tell the truth or always be kind. Finally, some suggest a definition for ethics where ethical actions are fair and just. These two ethical values are among those cited by many moral philosophers and psychologists as providing prescriptive ethical values to guide us. Next, we will consider some classical ethical models to provide a background for you as teachers. We leave to your professional judgment whether or not the information in this next slide is beneficial to share with your own students. We want to acknowledge that there are many other models that have rich history of describing what's ethical or moral. The ancient virtue-based model described in the writings of Aristotle focused his students on understanding and practicing the virtues of the day, to become a virtuous person and to live an ethical life. The virtue-based approach is making a comeback in modern moral philosophy and is an important foundation for this seminar. Almost 2,000 years later, Immanuel Kant argued for his deontological model that sought individuals to describe universal rules that one would have a duty to follow to be moral. And finally, in our short list here, John Stuart Mills is one of the original advocates for utilitarianism, which asserts that maximizing happiness for the greatest number of people defines the greatest good. Each model has its modern-day advocates and detractors. Educators have synthesized elements of all three of these models noted here with the goal to advance ethical action. In support of student ethical functioning, with the goal of ethical awareness, we will transition now to borrow from the moral psychology model of Jonathan Haidt. We will integrate the ethical values from Haidt's moral foundations theory into our Achieving with Integrity seminar. Haidt's definition of ethics is not so different from our working definition that values and principles will govern behavior. We highlight his reference to values in this moral system to regulate behavior. Haidt describes intuitive values, which we claim are analogous to Aristotle's virtues, and point to an approach that he suggests intuitive ethics advance universal ethical laws that support utilitarian benefit to a whole culture. We focus now on Haidt's set of intuitive values that regulate behavior as described in Haidt's psychological research. We'll integrate these values into our process to determine if an ethical situation is present. Haidt has identified 6 values that he claims his research has shown to have appeal across all cultures. Those universal values include care versus harm. Care is defined by protecting others from harm and showing compassion. Fairness versus cheating. Fairness is defined by treating others justly and not cheating them. Loyalty versus betrayal. Loyalty defined by fidelity and support for your own group, family, or community. Authority versus subversion, where authority defined as the value of respect, honor, or obedience to legitimate authority or just laws and traditions. Sanctity versus degradation. Sanctity is recognized to be an old term, and Haidt identifies it as a universal value in his research where people have the goal to remain pure, healthy, and avoid harmful things or actions. We have chosen to adapt this term and redefine it as integrity, with the goal to remain pure or consistent with personal beliefs and values. And finally, liberty versus oppression. Liberty is defined as protecting freedom of choice and resistance to tyranny. Our integration of Haidt's intuitive ethics or values into the trifactor model is intended to provide students a research-based list of core ethical values for case analysis, reasoning, and judgment. The nature versus nurture debate regarding the source of these ethical values is not essential to our application here. We do argue that identifying a clear list of ethical values for use throughout the seminar is practical from a teaching perspective. Haidt's list of core values is not exhaustive. In his own writings, he has acknowledged that other core values might be considered universal. Using a qualitative and cultural approach to identify values, Peterson and Seligman have described 24 character strengths that could be used to evaluate cases. The Lesson 1 resource page will have a summary of Haidt's and Peterson and Seligman's lists. As your school may have previously identified their own core values, we suggest that you consider how teaching with this list or any set of core ethical values, regional or universal, will help strengthen students' ethical awareness. Here are some additional terms that we observed in value statements in U.S. schools. Reciprocity, or the golden rule, says do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Respect, demonstrating positive regard, esteem, or honor for self, peers, or other adults. This goes beyond the respect for just legitimate authority, as noted by Haidt. Responsibility, and an obligation or duty to complete a task. Other core ethical values recognized as cited by schools include terms such as excellence, perseverance, self-control, gratitude, courage, generosity, and the current widespread enthusiasm for the term grit. Whether you use Haidt's core values or your own list or a combination of the two, we encourage you to determine a strategy to identify and then define your own core values. If the school has not already identified a set of core values, we suggest students help create your own list. Now, as an example of defining core values, let's look at a suggested definition for the term fairness. It is imperative to have your students define the terms of your core values in a manner that is relevant to them and to your school. Fairness is broadly recognized as a universal core value. Fairness is also recognized as a complex value and is often associated with allocation of resources. Resource allocation is seen to occur in many ways that include a distribution for, number one, equal opportunity, and merit, where all get equal opportunity to compete, but those who by their achievement earn special allocation of resources, scholarships, jobs, or recognition. Two, equal distribution, where allocations of resources are divided equally among all participants with or without merit and any other criteria. And three, allocation according to need, where special needs might require extra allocation of resources. Each of these definitions of fairness, or combinations of them, might be evaluated as ethical depending on the situation. The complexity of fairness must be understood by students to pursue any reasonable analysis of a fairness case. We recognize that finding consensus agreement to define fairness can sometimes be a challenge in itself. Narrowing the focus on fairness for an academic integrity definition, fairness can be defined as a student recognizes and resists actions or that an objective person would call cheating, and that they give him or her the advantage not available to other students. As one can surmise, the analysis of any case will only be as meaningful as the clarity of the shared understanding of the values used to evaluate the situation. We've chosen to add the value of reciprocity. Reciprocity, commonly defined as the golden rule, has many variations, but is widely known as to treat others as you would have others treat you. This value has an important role in developing ethical awareness. Reciprocity directs an individual to take on the consideration of circumstances, feelings, and the impact of the situation on others. Thus, reciprocity can help expand one's understanding of who's affected by an ethical situation and to help redirect the focus onto other people. As students apply reciprocity in a case analysis, we should encourage them to widen their lens of analysis to the broadest audience that is reasonable. This approach ultimately helps us to best answer, is this an ethical situation, without leaving out individuals who might be impacted by the case. Let's look at an example, and keeping with our interest in academic integrity, we will consider a cheating scenario. In this case, a student cheats on an exam by looking on a classmate's paper. For the purpose of cultivating ethical awareness, we want to know who is impacted by this behavior before we analyze the case to determine what core ethical values are compromised. In a narrow focus of analysis, we might determine just the cheater and the classmate who provided the view of the answers. The student providing answers might be implicated by similar wrong test answers as the cheater or by appearance of any cooperation which might be observed by the teacher. A wider focus of view might acknowledge that all the other classmates have been cheated by the possible advantage given to this one student. The widest focus of analysis might include any class witnesses who are affected by what they see taking place. Witnessing cheating is known to encourage others to cheat, which lowers an ethical standard for them. The widest lens would also take into consideration the teacher or administrators, and the cheater's parents if the cheater is caught and the parents are informed. Reciprocity would ask us to consider each of these audiences and how they would want to be treated. With this understanding and application of reciprocity, we introduce one other classification to understand in the development of a list of core values. As any list of core ethical values is created, it is useful to understand the classification of values described by Licona and Davidson in their text Smart and Good. This classification is intended to balance two types of values defined as performance and moral values that we briefly describe here. Moral values are defined by those core values that help us work well together and flourish as a community. It includes values such as fairness, respect, caring, and integrity. All four of these values are evident in the version of Haidt's intuitive values, while performance values are defined by those core values that help us be successful in our life's work, such as perseverance, excellence, courage, and responsibility. Licona and Davidson advocate that a balance of moral and performance values should be sought in identifying core values in an ethical system for any school community. The goal here, as noted by Licona and Davidson's book title, is for students to be both smart, a performance value, and good, a moral value, in their analysis and their actions. We emphasize the importance of identifying and defining a list of core ethical values, both moral and performance values, as the first step in the Achieving with Integrity seminar. As students are able to recognize and define core values, they can apply them to the 3 steps that we teach next for the goal to advance ethical awareness. We have created a graphic representation of these steps in the following figure, which offers a visual representation for the key process to strengthen student ethical awareness. To cultivate ethical awareness, we suggest a process with these 3 steps that include 1. Describe the situation and who is affected, and then 2. Focus attention on the relevant core ethical values to analyze the case, and 3. Determine if core values are compromised. Any perception that core values are compromised in a case would result in a judgment that an ethical situation exists. Students could then explain what and how core values were compromised. The main goal of Factor 1 is only to make the judgment, does the present case represent an ethical situation? Understanding and using core ethical values to analyze a case is key to student success in developing ethical awareness. Here is another look at the steps to develop ethical awareness. Again, step 1 for ethical awareness is to describe the situation and what kind of problems are present and who or what is affected in the case. Step 2 is to review the problem, guided by the definitions of core ethical values. We suggest Haidt's 6 Intuitive Ethics as a research-based list of universal ethical values, but understand if you have a reason to edit this list or use your own school list. If you do edit this list, we encourage you to balance your list with moral and performance character values. With your list of core ethical values, students will determine if any of your values are relevant to the case. In step 3, students are requested to make a judgment if an ethical situation is present or not. If an ethical situation is thought to exist, students should be able to describe the core values that are compromised. No ethical solutions are sought in Factor 1. The only focus is for students to review the case using core ethical values and make a judgment. Is an ethical situation present? Let's practice the steps with a hypothetical case. The case we include here is about Laura. Laura's at the top of her class at Hillside High. Everyone knows she's very smart, and her teachers often point her out as a model student. Her reputation, however, sometimes causes unwanted attention and difficult choices. One day, after taking a test in science class, one of Laura's friends stops her in the hall and starts grilling her for questions that were on the exam. Laura's friend will be taking the same test after lunch. Laura feels torn and doesn't know what to do. She doesn't want to upset her friend, but feels uncomfortable in sharing the test questions with her. Her friend, sensing the hesitation, asks, "Well, Laura, what's it going to be? Will you help me here? Is this an ethical situation?" Let's proceed with our first 3 steps. In step 1, the goal is for students to describe the situation. What are the issues and who is involved? An example response could be, Laura's a good student who just completed a test, and she's been asked by a friend who will take the test later for test questions. Directly involved are Laura and her friend. Indirectly are her other classmates and the teacher. Are there other points to be considered? We must practice achieving a clarity of this summary, as it will be essential in the application of core values to analyze the case. Step 2 is to review the problem with reference to core ethical values. We will apply some of Haidt's list along with reciprocity for this case. Beginning with care, a reasonable analysis could recognize that care is relevant to this case in multiple ways. Short-term and short-sighted care to help a friend cheat could harm both Laura and a friend if they were caught. However, care could be demonstrated to help a friend study without cheating. Analysis for the second core value could focus on fairness, and yes, this value is relevant too if Laura helps her friend with specific test questions that other students don't get the benefit of the same information. Analysis with the third core ethical value could recognize loyalty as relevant, but the analysis depends on the long-term commitment to a friend. Long-term loyalty would want a friend to learn and not cheat and risk any consequences no matter how minimal. And finally, for this example, our analysis with reciprocity reveals multiple perspectives to be considered. How would I want to be treated with a long-term perspective if I were Laura's friend? I'd realize a friend should not help me cheat, but a friend might help me to study. How would I want to be treated as another classmate of Laura's? I would not want others to have advantages that I have not received. And how would I want to be treated if I was the teacher? Certainly I am hoping that my students are not cheating. I would want my students to study, learn, and then represent themselves honestly on the exam. We could consider other core ethical values. Clearly authority is relevant, but the analysis just completed should be sufficient to help us make a clear judgment in step 3 to reply to the questions, is an ethical situation present? We believe most students would recognize, yes, this is an ethical situation. Multiple core values are compromised if Laura were to help her friend cheat, such as providing explicit test questions that are not available to other students. With the completion of this example and the review of resources on the Lesson 1 webpage, we trust you feel prepared to design and teach Lesson 1 to your students with the following objectives. Identify a list of core ethical values. Height's intuitive ethics, a local list, or a combination list to guide judgment on the presence or absence of an ethical situation. Define core ethical values in terms that are observable and complete the ethical analysis worksheet with a relevant case and the 3 steps to determine presence or absence of an ethical situation. To help you implement the strategies in support of ethical awareness, we have created a resource page for each of our 3 lessons. The resources include the video you're watching now and a video we completed in 2014 to provide an example of teaching with our Achieving with Integrity process. We provide lesson evaluation rubric to guide you in the design of your lesson, as well as a lesson planning outline and student worksheets in a Word document. If you are in our certification track, we have also provided you a way to respond to C and request additional explanation or support prior to drafting your own lesson plan. All of these files are available to anyone who has registered for this seminar, but the certification track teachers should recognize which files are required for our correspondence. For those completing this seminar for Achieving with Integrity certification, we request that once you have initiated your seminar work and have taught lesson 1, that you complete the other 2 lessons within a 3-week period. Otherwise, we believe the vocabulary, process, and effectiveness of implementation gets too drawn out for your students. We are here to help, and as time is available, you are welcome to schedule a phone call or email exchanges with us. Just contact us at ethics@ethicsed.org. Thank you again for participating in the Achieving with Integrity seminar. We trust you see the strategies described here as holding great potential to enhance your students' ethical and academic development. If you are on the certification track, we look forward to seeing your lessons and evaluation forms before you advance on to lesson 2. That's all for now. Thanks for joining us in completing this video for lesson 1. We look forward to your progress as you move on to lesson 2 and hope you will join us to support our mission to keep ethics in action.